Mike Flynn was supposed to walk into federal court today with that rarest of things, a get-out-of-jail-free card from Bob Mueller. And thanks to Flynn's extensive cooperation on multiple investigations, Mueller spared Flynn from other potential charges, recommending no jail. But something important happened on the way to the courthouse. Mike Flynn and his lawyers, they got fresh. They got brash. They started playing with the facts, and as the judge showed them today, they ended up playing themselves. Flynn's final filing in this case tried to walk back his guilty plea, tapping the Trump playbook to complain the FBI didn't warn him it was a crime to lie to them, which was, of course, embraced by Trump and some Flynn defenders. That maybe this is all the FBI's fault, not Flynn's. Maybe the man who pled guilty of a felony isn't really guilty of a felony.
It's going on right now with General Flynn. The FBI said he didn't lie.
I saw your tweet on that about
But Mueller said he did lie. So they took a man who's a general and a respected person and a nice man. They took a general that they said didn't lie, and they convinced him he did lie, and he made some kind of a deal.
Trump right there capturing Flynn's bizarre closing argument, trying to dilute Flynn's own guilty plea right before a judge decides whether he deserves leniency, which is what you get for taking responsibility and cooperating. Or, of course, the alternative is if a judge thinks that Flynn deserves a harsher punishment leading into today, then he could give it to him. So let's be clear before I go any further, and I'm going to break this down very clearly for you. Mike Flynn made this legally stupid, self-contradictory argument at the worst possible time, heading right into when the judge was deliberating today. And it backfired. Today we witnessed the hammer of the judicial system coming down on a former Trump aide who Mueller tried to help keep out of prison. This federal judge calling Flynn out immediately, asking him to own the argument in that new filing I mentioned and basically challenge how the FBI interviewed him. And Flynn folded, saying, "No, Your Honor, I'm not actually going to challenge the circumstances." Then pressed on Flynn's attack on the FBI about not warning him that his lies were a crime, Flynn folded, saying he was aware that lying to the FBI was a crime. And then Flynn claimed that he was still taking responsibility for all of that. And prosecutors also said today, as this all backfired, under questioning from the judge, they could have charged Flynn with another crime, and they chose not to. This judge put Flynn on notice that he took a bad situation for himself and made it worse, telling Mike Flynn he was disgusted and disdainful of those actions that Flynn had basically carried out. Arguably, you sold your country out. The court's going to consider that, the judge said in the sentencing, and at one point asked Mueller's prosecutors if Flynn could have been charged with treason, clarifying that the question itself doesn't mean that he would be charged with treason. Now, the judge told Flynn he wouldn't promise him no jail time. And then the judge made it very plain, telling Flynn that despite Mueller's request that Flynn stay out of jail, he may still send him to prison. That was a turning point today, and it uncorked everything we're dealing with tonight, because it implied that maybe if Flynn kept cooperating to the end of this probe before sentencing, he might be better off than the thing that blew up in his face today. And then Mike Flynn folded. Having dropped his defiant attacks on the FBI under oath today, he went on to drop the entire plan to get sentenced today. I can tell you, we were planning to cover this. We weren't planning to not get any sentencing information. This is all big and new tonight. Mike Flynn has talked a very big game for a long time. He got close to Trump by talking trash about Hillary Clinton.
If I, a guy who knows this business, if I did a tenth of what she did, I would be in jail today.
But with all that big Willie talk, Flynn was playing himself. And he talked a big game to the Russian ambassador. And when he lied about that to the FBI, Flynn was playing himself. And today, Flynn turned a free pass from Mueller into this judicial smackdown. With all that big Willie talk, again, Flynn was playing himself. How does someone keep making the same mistake? You know, this criminal tendency was diagnosed by the great Kendrick Jeru Davis, who explained that people who talk the loudest often put themselves in the most danger, saying, "I never knew hustlers confessed in stereo. Mama always said, watch what comes out your mouth. A tight case for the DA from here to down south." Mueller had a tight case against Flynn to begin with. According to this judge today, it got even tighter thanks to Mike Flynn. Let's bring in our panel. Shelby Holiday covers the Russia investigation for the Wall Street Journal. Matt Miller has worked at the DOJ, and Malcolm Nance, of course, an MSNBC terrorism analyst. Matt, you look at this situation. Why do you think Mike Flynn played himself so badly in court today?
So I think his lawyers had a strategy. They, and I will say I know both of his attorneys. They're very smart, very well accomplished attorneys here in town. And they said that the reason they put that information into the memo is they were trying to differentiate him from other people who have been sentenced in this case, George Papadopoulos and the Dutch lawyer who had been sentenced for the same crime for making false statements. And they were trying to show that there were some mitigating circumstances. Obviously, that was not well received with the judge, and it led him to go through this series of questions of both Flynn and his attorney, where he basically got them to walk back everything that they had said and kind of obliterate this conspiracy theory. Now,
I mean, how good can that lawyering be, as you just reported for us or analyzed for us? They had to walk it all back because there's a big difference between mitigation, which is, hey, this isn't as bad as it looks, as it might look, and denial, which is, oh, maybe I didn't do the thing.
Yeah, there was absolutely a contradiction in the argument they were making, and it's, I think, quite clear their strategy didn't work. I suspect what they were trying to do. Look, Judge Sullivan has a well-earned reputation of being, pretty skeptical of the government's actions sometime, of taking a skeptical view of the government abusing its power over subjects and over defendants, and I think they were trying to play into that a little bit.
But here's the deal with that, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just pushing you forward.
Yeah.
You're talking about that Judge Sullivan has a history of calling out prosecutorial misconduct. You know and have discussed the fact that that happened in Republican Senator Ted Stevens' case. It's happened in other cases. The judge is skeptical of the Petraeus prosecution. The difference here is, based on the public record, there isn't misconduct by Mueller's prosecutors of the FBI.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think the other thing they missed, and they didn't know until they got the courtroom today, is how disgusted the judge was with the underlying conduct. So then you had this combination of the judge being both disgusted with the underlying conduct and very clearly thinking that that underlying conduct deserved a sentence, a jail time sentence, not a no jail time sentence, as the prosecutor had recommended.
Do you
and
think,
you combine that
I'm going to go to you and then Malcolm on that. Matt, your view as our analyst here is you think he was headed towards getting real jail time.
Yeah, he absolutely was, and I think his lawyers and he both recognized that, and that's why they took, they basically took the advice he was giving them between the lines, and when they took this recess, went and thought about what was happening and decided to come back at a later date when he's given a little more cooperation, and maybe that little bit more cooperation gets him out of the jail sentence he was headed for.
Have you ever seen, Matt, a sentencing hearing of a former federal official like this?
No, absolutely not. But I will say, if I had to guess one judge that would give us that would preside over a hearing like this, it would be Emmett Sullivan.
Malcolm?
Today the judge actually gave us something we don't see too often, which is someone who has a measured, mature, eloquent way of viewing the case and came up with the sentence, why aren't you in prison, technically? Why aren't we considering treason? This, we live in this political pundit bubble, and we have these two opposing sides who are trying to say what we should and should not think about Michael Flynn. This judge laid it on the line. Michael Flynn betrayed the nation. He literally, for money, sold out the nation. And he was just confused as to why this wasn't treason. And I think he may even have deliberately brought up that word in order to make it clear to everyone listening just how severe the activities that Mike Flynn did and was actually about to get off on.
Build on that point, Malcolm, because you're going to two things that we alluded to in the setup here that are so important to, I'll say it, to America. This judge laid out for everyone here in open court. That's why we have transparency, why we have open courts. Number one, lying to the FBI was the tip of the iceberg. This guy, he asked the prosecutors, could you have charged this guy, Mike Flynn, for other things, for treason and for other crimes? They discussed treason briefly, and then they said, yes, we could charge him on other crimes because they did that in Virginia this week on the foreign lobbying, as you put it, selling out America for money. Walk us through, Malcolm, from a national security perspective, why it is potentially good for the country to have a judge lay this out under oath.
Well, first, we have 1/3 of the country just flat out refuses to believe anything that is said by anyone other than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump started the day by wishing Michael Flynn good luck on this. Michael Flynn was considered a liar by President Trump when President Trump fired him from the job of National Security Advisor for lying to Mike Pence. Now, is that true? We don't know, but I suspect we're going to find out. Not only that, Michael Flynn was up against the wall for perhaps dozens of real serious crimes. Let me tell you, within the intelligence community, the thought was Michael Flynn may have been a turned agent to Russian intelligence, the way that he was showing such obsequiousness.
That was not confirmed by any means in this case.
It was never confirmed, but his relationships with Russia and the Turks, Russia and Saudi Arabia with regards to nuclear power plants, the potential abduction of a U.S. resident and extraditing him to Turkey extrajudicially. I mean, this guy was up for a lot. Whatever he did and however he convinced Robert Mueller, he did it well, but not well enough to convince this judge that he shouldn't see the inside of a prison.
Right, and it's a reminder, Shelby, that we have a system where, yes, Bob Mueller is very important, but it's a good thing that there are other checks on him. If he goes too far, the judges can stop him and say, we're not accepting that. If he doesn't go, in the view of this judge, far enough, the judge can say, thanks for your recommendation. I'm glad Mike Flynn was helpful to your investigation.
Right.
But not only did he play himself, more importantly, he sold out, according to the judge, the United States. He's going to pay for it.
I think that's a really good point. And I think the Justice Department in general, throughout the course of this Mueller probe, has made it very clear that you can't have it both ways. You can't take responsibility for your crime, yet try to shift that responsibility to the circumstances of your interview or to some other sort of conspiracy theory. But also, the Justice Department's made it very clear they're not beholden to politics. If you look back to the Michael Cohen sentencing, President Trump tried to place his own person at the head of the SDNY, the Southern District of New York, and that didn't stop the Southern District from really throwing the book at Michael Cohen.
Right.
Then you have today Michael Flynn. Even though Mueller is saying we don't recommend much prison time, if any, the judge is saying, I don't necessarily agree in so many words.
Right.
Same thing with Papadopoulos.
With the contrast you draw there, we were discussing this last night with Michael Cohen's former lawyer, Lanny Davis. There was daylight between Mueller saying Cohen did a great job, no prison, like Flynn, and SDNY here in New York going much farther, which is a story we're going to keep covering. Shelby, take a listen to Fox News' Jeannie Pirro and what they thought was going to happen today. And you know this saying on the internet, no spoilers? Here's a spoiler. What they thought was going to happen was wrong. Take a look.
A jurist unafraid of the swamp, a judge who has a track record of calling out prosecutorial misconduct, a man who does not tolerate injustice or abuse of power. Judge Sullivan can throw out this guilty plea if he concludes the FBI intentionally interfered with their target, Flynn's constitutional right to counsel.
You know, in some ways she was right. He does not tolerate abuse of power, and he made that very clear. But broadly speaking...
Flynn's abuse, not the FBI.
Right.
Go ahead.
I think the judge gave him an interesting window to ask if he wanted to truly challenge his circumstances of his interview, and he said no. But you have to remember that that's because the 302 was recently released that shows all of the lies, all of the misstatements that Flynn made, and it showed it was sort of Flynn's own fault. It was at the prompting of his lawyers filing last week that this came to light in the first place.
I don't want to put words in your mouth as a journalist, but it sounds like we're returning to the point that Mike Flynn played himself in a colossal way.
There you go. Better way of saying it, but it's true. And so because this came out, it would have been really difficult for Flynn to look that judge in the eye and say, yes, I want to challenge the circumstances of my interview.
Matt Miller, before I turn to some other guests, because we have a great show tonight, if I could say in my personal opinion, this kind of colossal backfiring, what do you see as any implications for Mike Flynn's legal team and other lawyers who are going to go forward in this probe?
Well, I think the other lawyers will be hoping that they're in front of a different judge, first of all, who's not likely to be so harsh with them. I think for Mike Flynn's legal team, they have a tough road ahead. he has already cooperated, 19 interviews for something like 62 hours he spent with federal prosecutors going through everything he tells them. There is not much more cooperation he can give between now and March or whenever they come back. So if he's looking at a jail sentence, it's hard to see how much more incremental value he can add that makes that jail sentence go away. I think the best they can hope is that, the judge kind of, cools down a little bit and as angry as he was today, or angry is not the right word, as disgusted he was with the defendant's conduct, that he somehow has a little bit of a reversal and backs down by the time they eventually get to sentencing.
Right, and that was the only off-ramp he also gave them in saying, are you sure you want to do this now? And they folded quickly. Matt Miller, Shelby Holiday, Malcolm Nance, thank you. I want to turn to some other guests right now. Michael Flynn's sentencing occurs here now at a later date. Now, the judge did order Mueller's team, as we were just discussing, Shelby mentioned the 302s. Those are these notes of FBI interviews with Michael Flynn, and they reveal a lot of the details on the lies. Now, in the guilty plea, Flynn admitted he lied about conversations about Russian sanctions with then Ambassador Kislyak from Russia, saying he called him and asked that the Russians not escalate the situation. This was after the Obama administration was sanctioning Russia for, yes, the election meddling that helped Donald Trump. Right after the call, he went to speak with another Trump official. That's what Flynn has admitted occurred. In his FBI interview, though, when asked about that, and the sanctions, which expelled Russian diplomats from the U.S. and closing these Russian properties, Flynn just flatly denied it to the FBI, saying they didn't talk about it. Said he didn't even know these expulsions were happening because he was on vacation, because he wasn't watching the news, and he said because his BlackBerry wasn't working. To get into this piece of the story, which is equally important, we have some really perfect guests, I would argue. Michael McFaul, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, and Natasha Bertrand, who has been breaking stories on this case left and right for The Atlantic. Thanks to both of you for joining me on a big night.
Thanks for having us.
Ambassador, when you look at not only what happened today, and I'm curious of anything you want to say about that, but secondly, to this particular point that we bring you in on, we don't usually see this kind of raw interview with a national security advisor, let alone one who later pleads guilty to felonies, that we got late yesterday. And that is, I want to be clear for viewers, that's part of the backfiring of the Flynn strategy. It wasn't like Mueller was pushing this out. It was Flynn saying the FBI was tough on him, so now the material comes out. I guess I'll ask you the basic question first. Does this new material hurt or help Michael Flynn, and what do you glean from it?
Well, just reading it today, it's just dumbfounding again to me. Why was General Flynn during the transition doing all this diplomatic activity? I mean, we're talking about his conversations with Kislyak, we'll get to in a minute, but why was he calling all these people about a UN Security Council vote? That is not the job of the transition National Security Advisor designate. He should have been focusing on putting his team together, making appointments, and that he was doing all this is very strange to me. And number two, the obvious big question for me is, why did he lie about his conversations with Kislyak? There would have been an easy way to do that. He could have called him and say, I just want to remind you, Sergei, our government will be in power January 20th, and we'll be reviewing our policy, period. That would have been the signal, and he could have reported that, end of story. It's not right in my view. It's wrong. We should have one government at a time. But why he chose to go farther than that and then lie about it leads me to wonder, why was he lying? I still don't know the answer to that question.
Natasha, the ambassador raises something that here in I'll say 18 minutes of coverage on this remarkable hearing today we hadn't touched on yet, which is the question that the ambassador puts very carefully and very respectfully, why? The harsher way to put it is, obviously, to take such great felonious risk, there must be something worse that Mike Flynn was apparently hiding.
Right, and I was speaking to a former Justice Department official who actually handled aspects of this case before he left last year, and he said, well, you have to remember that there's a lot about this case that the public still doesn't know, and the judge went as far as to say this morning that there was still a lot of information that was not available in the public domain that he had seen. And so I think when we're considering the judge's disgust and disdain with Michael Flynn's behavior here, we also have to remember that there's a lot underneath the surface that we don't really know. perhaps about Michael Flynn's motivations in lying about his conversations with Kislyak. Also, there's the question of whether or not Michael Flynn was doing this, was lying essentially to cover himself, because he was apparently pursuing some kind of deal with Russia to build nuclear reactors in the Middle East that would have required lifting sanctions on Russia. Of course, he was, dealing with Turkey and kind of freelancing on these projects on the side. So there are a number of questions about whether or not Michael Flynn was solely acting in the interests of the president, and whether the president himself had directed this effort to tell the Russians that they were going to revisit the sanctions, or whether Michael Flynn was acting in his own personal self-interest. I would say that there's a big argument for the latter, because of course he didn't hesitate to turn against the president essentially and immediately begin to cooperate. His lawyer said last year that Michael Flynn had a story to tell. So clearly he's been telling that story, and to what extent that implicates the Trump transition team and the president himself is unclear. He also might be angling for a pardon here. I think that's something that legal experts have pointed out with regard to the strategy in implicating, the FBI and potential misconduct. That might be some kind of signaling to the president and his base, because it certainly didn't help his case with the judge.
Ambassador, what you have here is a portrait of possible attempted foreign efforts to use money inducement, as well as what other harsher efforts, to co-opt or flip people at the highest levels of the U.S. government. How do we deal with that above and beyond just the day-to-day casework here in court?
Well, we need, to Natasha's point, there's a lot we don't know. That's what I feel when I see this, and we're left with it. There's a lot we don't know. I do think we need clear laws about how we want our transition officials to conduct themselves. And maybe instead of all of this informality that we have in tradition, we codify these things. There are the kind of reporting structures that you do when you work at the embassy in Moscow, for instance, for my staff, that they had to do. Maybe we do that for transition officials as well. We don't want to just go beyond this and say, well, it wasn't that big a deal. Nothing really happened here. It seems to me it was a pretty big deal. Russia had a strategy, a comprehensive strategy involving social media, hacking, and reaching out to people like Mr. Flynn. We should have a comprehensive strategy for combating that in the future.
It's well put, and it goes to why we believe the judge said he was so disgusted, because you're talking about a judge raising the question of treason about someone who was literally in charge of American national security for however brief a time. Ambassador McFaul, Natasha Bertrand, thanks to both of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.